Hi everyone, I'm Rob Flattery from the Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design, also known as RMCAD.
Today we're taking a step into the world of music production by learning how to make scenes in Ableton Live. This fun tutorial is one of the several skills that you'll learn as a RMCAD student. Our programs vary in diversity while providing you the knowledge you need to thrive as a young artist. We offer technologies like this on our Wondering Pixel as well as in our classrooms. Today's workshop is being taught by our Chair of Music Production, Sean Paquet. Sean is both a professional and a scholar in the realm of music production, so listen up and enjoy.
Hey, what's up? Today we're going to chop up an arrangement that is in Arrange View in Ableton, and we're going to prepare it for kind of more dynamic, nonlinear performance by moving it over in the Session View. So this is our arrangement. We're mostly going to be dealing with the front part of this, bars 1 through 73, and it's kind of mapped out here across several tracks that are stacked or layered on top of each other vertically on the screen, and each of the tracks is color-coded and given a name, and we can select them individually. And we can use the loop bar here for the majority of our kind of chopping up of this arrangement. So when I say chopping up, what I'm doing is thinking about slices in time of the vertical arrangement, not different tracks and their individual sounds and composition running horizontally across the screen. So we have to look at where things change in time, and then we're going to take vertical slices of those timestamps. So if we look at starting at bar 1, we can hover over the top measure bar here and zoom in. We can look and see that nothing changes in the composition until, starting at bar 1 until bar 5. So there's a 4-bar section where we don't get the introduction of any new material. Let's listen to that real quick. Okay, so starting in bar 5, all of a sudden we get those little hi-hat and rim shot sounds coming in the drums. But before bar 5, we don't have any sounds coming from the drum rack. So let's take that as our first slice. So as you see, I adjusted the loops by hovering over the right or potentially the left side and expanding or contracting the loop regions. And then if you click on the bar in between those arrows that define the boundaries of the loop, we can right click there and say consolidate time to new scene. And what this does is it takes the vertical arrangement across all tracks and it translates it into a time slice that now runs horizontally as clips in Session View. And I believe I was hovering over or had selected scene 7 along the master track here. So it placed the clips into scene 7. We can highlight all of scene 7, take these clips, and we can move them up to scene 1 and start from there. And then let's go identify our next region. We'll come back to Session View and trigger those clips and test out how to play them back in a second. Let's move over another scene before we do that though. So starting at bar 5, I'm looking for where things change. So we get another change 4 bars later, starting at bar 9. So again, a 4-bar loop here that can be its own time slice. Take the same kind of range, 4 bars, right click at the top of the bar, consolidate time to new scene, and we get another scene showing up underneath the previous scene. So now we have scene 2. And by hitting the master, we'll play the scene. We could play scene 1, play scene 2, and I'm triggering those scenes by playing the master. I can trigger those scenes individually as individual clips, which is one of the most powerful aspects of Ableton as a music production environment. It allows for this kind of dynamic, nonlinear loop arrangement through session view. And we can also structure how those triggers are quantized according to the tempo of the track. So we're at a tempo of 112 beats per minute, which is defined right there. We're not going to want to change that, but we could potentially change how it responds or aligns with the grid when we click the play arrow. So right now it's responsive to anything I do on the quarter note level. So I could hit it really fast and it won't trigger anything faster than a quarter note. So we just get a bunch of quarter note articulations there of restarting the scene and going back to the beginning of the clip every time I trigger. But it won't go faster than a quarter note. It basically aligns every triggering of the scene with the nearest quarter note. If we do that with bar 1, we can choose which quarter note we want to start bar 2 on. So realize that didn't sound particularly aligned because it didn't really align with the musical material, which is being structured in bars, which is a larger metrical grouping than the individual beats. So because we were in 4/4 time, that means that 4 quarter notes equal 1 bar. If we want to trigger according to bars, we have to wait 4 beats. 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. And we can cycle through scenes according to bar groupings. An easier way to do that is simply change the quantization level for the triggering. So we can come and hit Command 9 or select 1 bar right here. And now everything will be synced according to the bar, and I can't trigger any scenes to start not on a bar. Very hard to mess up. Actually, I'd say it's impossible to mess up because the music material is defined and composed to align with these bar endpoints, and so it's going to sound like pretty cohesive music regardless of how willy-nilly you're triggering the scenes. Okay, so we have 2 scenes with 1 change in musical material. Let's try and add some more scenes to it and flesh out the rest of this composition so that we can perform the composition by triggering scenes in the right order and even improvise by hopping back and forth between different scenes and giving it different timings than the initial lockdown arrangement in the arrange window, which is tied to a sense of consistent time. We can kind of improvise off of that. We're not tied to it. We're not locked down on the arrange window in the same way once we move it over into session view. So the next musical material change happens on bar 9. And visually we can see that that lines up with another 4-bar loop. We don't get another change until bar 13, so I can just right click on that, consolidate time to new scene, and continue moving left to right. Basically looking at the arrangement and identifying if there are any material changes that happen. Now certainly things can change on a quicker level than 4 bars, but the beginning of this track is pretty consistent. Here's a bit of a difference. We get to bar 21 and notice that nothing changes at bar 25. So we can actually extend this grouping and loop over 8 bars instead of 4. Consolidate time to new scene. And it looks to be a transition here. Let's hear how that plays out. I'm going to start halfway through this scene. So what's interesting here is that we can trigger this, we can identify this transition and trigger it as its own scene, or we could include it in the previous scene. So there are two options here, and they're both are totally valid depending on how you want to perform and play back the material. We could make it a 9-bar scene, and we just anticipate this 1-bar transition coming in at the end of it, and every time that transition happens, we expect a change. Or we could keep the loop that is 8 bars here very consistent, so that there's no endpoint transition, and when we get to the end of it, starting here, I'm going to turn loop on just so it loops back to the beginning of it. It just starts back at the beginning like nothing ever happened and allows us to play the scene more than once without encountering that transition. That's the option I'm going to opt for right now, is to keep the loop, and to make the transition its own scene. So right click, consolidate time to new scene, and that's a transition. Now, it might be useful to label that. So let's come over here, and we know that the most recent scene that I just created is the transition. That's the transition. It's only 4 beats or 1 bar in length, but it might be good to identify it not just visually as having a drum rack and this group 9 set of clips associated with it. We can expand group 9 and take a look at what's actually there. Looks like it's only just one of the instruments included in group 9. It would be good not to just have to rely on visualization for that, but if we label it, it could become a little bit clearer. So we'll call this transition 1. And we can expand the masters so we can view that. And the tempos show up if you expand it too far. We don't need the tempos. We just need to be able to view the name of the scene. Okay, there's our scene. So we know that when we click this, we really only have 1 bar to play with until we want to move somewhere else, because it's going to transition into something. It's really not set up or designed to be a loop itself. So we can kind of chop up other loops or cut them off by jumping to the transition, and then we can use that transition in a variety of ways. In the set arrangement on the timeline, the transition only functions in one location, but that doesn't mean we have to treat it the same way once we move it over into session view. Let's continue on, and I think we have an 8-bar loop right here that we can consolidate to a new scene and move forward. We have a larger section here with the introduction of some additional percussion up top. Let's chop these up individually, consolidate time to new scene as separate 4-bar loops. And looks like we might have another transition here. Let's hear how this plays out. Okay, so slight transition there. It's a bit of a, other instruments drop out there and we just get the melodic lead until the drums and the bass come back in their regular expected pattern. So let's right click there. We'll treat it like a 2-bar transition, consolidate time to new scene, over to session view, and we will right click here and rename this as transition 2. Okay, so that second transition is 2 bars and the first transition is 1 bar. So that's pretty convenient. We labeled them transition 1 and transition 2. We can make a mental note that transition 1 is in fact 1 bar and transition 2 is 2 bars. And whenever we're looking for a transition, if we're playing it more dynamically, we can identify if we want it to go with the first option or the second. Once we hit the back part of this arrangement, we loop for quite a while without significant change. So if I'm looking across the arrangement here, I believe nothing changes from bar 48. Zooming in here to take a look, yeah, we have bar 47 into bar 48, starting at bar 48 up until bar 60, there are no changes. So this is kind of the most continuous looped region of the arrangement. We will consolidate time to new scene there, check that it put it in the right spot. It did. And moving on, I think we'll do just the ending here and see how this sounds before we decide whether or not to chop it into 2 or perhaps 3 different regions. Okay, I think I'm going to go with the option of chopping that into 3 different loops, as there's an articulation right at the end there that lingers, and we want to capture that fade out, or the last sound that appears in the track. And we want to capture these instruments dropping out while the percussion loop and the melody continue right here as well. So let's cut it down to 3 4-bar loops, consolidate time to new scene, cut over here, consolidate time to new scene, and last but not least, we're going to extend this an extra bar or 2 so that we can capture the final notes. Oops. Consolidate time to new scene. Okay. So these last ones, I think I did that twice. Let's get rid of that. And we have a full arrangement chopped up in session view where we can trigger it and move through the regions dynamically without feeling locked to the grid or tied down to the timeline in a way that prohibits, new arrangements and new forms and more adaptive improvisational performance. So now I'm going to kind of choose a section to start with and figure out where to go by interspersing transitions with denser or sparser scenes. So we'll start at the beginning. We'll hop around. So again, I'm triggering on the bar level, so it's very difficult to mess up because we've identified the musical material shifts at the level of a bar or groups of 2 or 4 bars. So any grouping or multiple of 2 bars should be absolutely fine for me to transition from one scene to another. And I'm looking at the number of beats that have passed. I'm going to wait for it to circle around. And then we get the introduction of the higher frequency synth. Filter opened up on that. Little transition there, 1 bar stepping into the next scene. We'll have to transition 2 after the full loop of this. So 32 beats in this loop, looking at that circle, so I come around. Transition 2 bars. And we're into another scene here. Okay, the filter pulled back down here. Use transition of 1 again to shift there as the energy change in that scene as the filter sweep took effect. Set us up for another transition. Let's thin it out. We'll go back to transition 2. And transition 2 may be setting us up for an end. Okay, so we can play around with that performance, and we can actually record that performance too and translate it back to the arrangement view. Once we play with it in a nonlinear fashion, improvise more with the form of the track and the different musical materials and the different scenes that we have available to us. So a lot is flexible. A lot of powerful stuff can happen in simply translating musical material from arrangement view into session view and vice versa, starting in session view and moving to arrangement view, getting precise with the effects and how things are laid out in time, then chopping it up again, moving it back into session view, and playing around with the form. Have fun experimenting.
We have the project file on hand for you to download right now. Check out the link on our website or in the YouTube description to rewatch and follow along. Thanks for watching.